Hey there, welcome back. So today's video is significantly longer than I meant it to be, but there wasn't a good place to chop it in half when I was editing it. So here's what we're doing today. We're going to take our treasure chest, which right now does this, and we're going to make it so that if we hit the space bar, or whatever key you want to, we have the treasure chest open. We have our character go into this little animation where they're holding up an item. In this case, it's a key. And we have a little bit of dialogue about that key. Right now we can't move. If we hit space, we go out of that, and now we don't get that context clue anymore. So thanks for watching, and let's dive right in. So where we left off last time, we're able to kind of walk into the chest here, and we get this little interactable pop-up. So couple things we need to fix here really quickly before we do anything else. Right now the chest is on a sorting layer that's above the player, so we need to fix that. And then we'll dive right in. This is probably going to be a little bit of a longer episode than we're used to. It's probably going to be between 20 and 30 minutes. So if you want to split this into two parts, just fair warning ahead of time. So let's get this done. All right, so first thing I want to do is go to my treasure chest here. And let me fix that sorting issue. Right now it's on the breakable sorting layer. I'm going to put it on the player sorting layer, but so that Unity isn't deciding which one should go on top, the player or this, I'm going to put it beneath the player's layer. So I'm going to put it at a layer of -1. The lower the sorting layer, or the lower the order in layer is, the farther away from the camera the object appears to be. So there we go. And now the next thing I want to do is jump to my player. And I'm going to add a new animation for our player. Now, inside the art folder, inside GFX2, and then inside, where is it, character. If I open this up in my sprite editor, there's a little one-frame animation for the player holding up an object. And if you use the auto slice, or even if we slice the way that we were supposed to, this gets split into 2 frames, but it really only is 1 frame. So I'm going to grab this one on the left, and I'm just going to pull it over. Or sorry, the one on the right, and pull it over. And I'm going to pull the one on the left until you can see this blue frame is lined up exactly with the end of the player's hair. And the reason I'm doing that is because if we look at the other frames of animation, you can see the blue frame is right with the player's hair there. So it should look okay. So I'm going to apply that. And then I want to remember which frame that is. It's 11. So I'll go out. On my player sprite, I'm going to create a new clip. And I'm going to call this, make sure it's in animations first. And inside player animations, I'm going to call this receive item. And this is going to be just that 1 frame. So character 11. There we go. And if I hit play, cool. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to take a look at my animator for my player. And I now have this receive item animation that's just kind of here out of nowhere. So I'm going to reorganize this a little bit. I'll pull this about right there. And then I'll put the attacking there. And then I'll have receive item have a transition from any state. So whether you're walking or idle or attacking. And then we'll make another transition back to idle. Now in order for this to work the way it's supposed to, I'm going to add another parameter, which is a bool, and I'm going to call this, let's say, receive item. And I can put a space in there because it's a string. Okay, so now I want to transition from any state to receive item, so I'm going to click on that little link there. I don't want it to have an exit time or a fixed duration. And I'm just going to even delete the fixed duration here just to keep Unity from doing anything with it. And I'm going to add something to my transition. So I want it to be if receive item is true, and then I'll go from receive item to idle with no fixed duration, transition duration of 0 seconds, no exit time, and that's going to happen when receive item is false. So those are two things I'm going to have to set in the script. So let me jump back to my scene here. All right, so let me actually move my player so you can see them here. So in The Legend of Zelda, when you pick up an item, there's that little da-na-na-na where Link turns to face the camera and then holds up an item. So we're going to have an object that's going to sit right about here, right above our little character. And that object's just going to always be there. It's not going to do anything until we receive an item. When we receive an item, we're going to give that object a sprite. And that sprite is going to be based on whatever item our character is receiving. So first thing we're going to do here is on my player, I'm going to create an empty game object. And I'm going to call this received item. And I'm going to give this a sprite renderer component, but I'm not going to set the sprite yet. I'm just going to leave the sprite unset. I'm also, so that I know where it is in space, going to give this an icon. Give it an orange one, and I'll pull it up to where I think it should be. About right there. I'll go a little bit higher to, let's say, 1.2. All right, cool. And so that can be whatever. Now this... whatever, man, I lost my words. This little tag here, this won't show up in game view. So if we switch over to game, we can see it's not there. Okay, cool. Now I want to take my player back underneath the camera so the camera doesn't jerkily jump towards them. Okay, I'm going to make a new signal next. So here's the main idea behind all of this. When we go to our treasure chest, while we're inside the treasure chest's little signal area, if we press a button, like say the space button, then we want the player to go into this animation, or the animation it just had, and we also want them to have an item show up above their head, and then a little dialog box telling us what that item is. So to do that, we're going to use a signal. So when we are in here, we're going to send a signal from the treasure chest to the player about what item it needs to be holding up, and that it needs to go into that kind of holding up an item state. So to do that, I'm going to go to my scriptable objects. I'm going to create a new signal, and I need to clean these up a little bit. I'm going to call this signal receive item. So I'm going to make a new folder here to clean this up. First one is going to be enemy healths. And right now there's only one, but in the future, pretty soon here, we're going to have more than one. So I'll put that in there, and then I'll create another folder for signals. And I'm going to put context clue on in there, and I'm going to put health signal and receive item. I'm going to create another folder, and I'll call this player stuff. Nice and descriptive, player stuff. Could be anything. We just know it's stuff about the player. All right, cool. So in my signal here, I've got my receive item signal. Now, I'm going to go to my received item object on my player. So my received item object. And I'm going to add as a component a signal listener, because this is going to listen for the signal that it's received an item, and then based on that signal, it's going to do stuff. So I'll give it the received item signal. And I don't have any method written for this yet, so I can just leave that kind of empty there. All right, cool. So we are going to, let's make two new scriptable objects. And this is going to be the beginnings of an inventory system, which people have been asking for a while, and it is coming. I am going to do an inventory system. It's just going to be a separate tutorial series. It's going to start probably mid to late January. Anyway, so we're going to create the beginnings of an inventory system here. So we'll go to our scripts. scriptable objects, and in here I'm going to create 2 new C# scripts. I'm going to create one that I'm going to call item, and this is going to be a scriptable object that's going to represent an item. I'm going to create another C# script that I'm going to call inventory, and this is going to represent the player's current inventory. So I'm going to open both of these up in Visual Studio. And I should have Visual Studio going in the background, so there we go. Cool. And I've got item up, and let's get inventory up, because the two are going to use each other, because your inventory is made up of items. All right. The first thing I'm going to do, because these are going to be scriptable objects, I'm going to do create asset menu. And then this isn't going to inherit from mono behavior. It's going to inherit from scriptable object, which means it doesn't get the update or start methods. So I'll remove those. And then item, same thing. Create asset menu. And then this is going to be inheriting from scriptable object. So no update or start. Now, what I want to do here is I want to think about what an item needs to have. So we just said in Unity here, with the player object, where we're doing this received item, we need to have a sprite on there, which means we need to know what sprite to put here. We also said, or I said, we're not actually having a conversation, I wanted to have a dialog box for what the item was. So I'm going to need to have a string telling me what that dialogue is. And I'm sure there's other stuff too that we're going to want to do. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my keys separate from other objects. And the reason I'm going to do that is just because it's how Zelda does it. So I'm going to have just a Boolean value about whether or not it's a key. So in here, in my item class, I'm going to make a reference to the sprite. So I'm going to do a public sprite. We'll call this item sprite, and we'll do a public string item description, and let's do a public bool is key. All right, so that's what I have for my items so far. And like I said, this is a really, really simple version of an inventory. We'll do a more in-depth one later. Now, in my inventory script, I'm going to create a reference to whatever the current item is, meaning whatever was in that chest I just opened. So I'm going to say public item, current item, and this is one way of sending information from the treasure chest to the player. So I got my current item, and then I'm going to do a public list of items that I'm going to call, just items. And that's a new list of items. Okay. And this list is going to be essentially what our inventory is. And then one more thing, which is going to be my public int, and I'll call this number of keys, which is how many small keys I have. All right, so I'm going to save this. Now, that should all be okay. I'm going to go back into Unity, my scriptable objects, and I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call this items. Yep, okay, I did do that. I'm just impatient. Items, and inside the items folder, I'm going to create a new item, and I'm going to call this one small key. And now I want this to be a key, and my item description is going to be, it's a small key. Is there a door somewhere? Question mark. Actually, let's not do somewhere, let's do nearby. Now, as far as the sprite goes, I couldn't find one in this GFX one, which is, I mean, whoever made this did an excellent job, first of all. Second of all, though, the problem about using other people's art is that you're almost never going to find something that's exactly perfectly tailored to what you want to do. So if you're bringing in other art, you have to be really careful about making sure that you're being consistent with the color and the just the general sprite design. And so I made one of my own that is definitely not consistent. So I'll include a link to that sprite in the description below. But it's in my sprites here, and I just call it key.png. So there we go. I'm going to bring this into my game. I'm going to make it 16 pixels per unit. No filter and normal, no compression, and max size 32. So I'll apply that. And now I can go back to my scriptable objects, my item, my small key, lock this for a second, go back to my art, and give it that sprite. So now I know what the sprite is. Okay, now all of this is kind of like some back-end stuff. We haven't really added any new functionality yet. So let's start adding some functionality. And we'll do that by taking a look at the treasure chest script that we started making last time. And all we really did is just make it something that inherits from Interactable, which gives us a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of functionality for free, because we're inheriting from the base class. Now, what I want to do next is I want to first say what's going to be inside that chest. So let's do public item contents. So this is going to be what's in the chest. And I also need to know public bool is open, so whether or not the chest has already been opened, because you don't want to have the player open the chest and then get an item and then be able to open it again. We need to know, is it open or is it closed? The next thing that we need to do here, sorry, I'm consulting my notes, is let's make a reference to that signal that we're using to tell the player that they're in this treasure chest state. So signal, and we'll call this raise item, maybe, because that's kind of what the player is doing, is raising the item. Let's make a reference to that dialog window, which means we're going to need to add using Unity engine.ui. And then we're going to do a public game object dialog window, which is just the dialog window itself. And then we'll also do a public text dialog text. Okay, cool. And we need to know the chest's animator too. So this is going to be a private animator anim. And then I'll set anim down here in the start method. So anim is equal to get component animator. All right, cool. So what I want to do in the update method here, I'm going to use my sign code as kind of like a way to check this. So in my sign code, if I press the space and I'm in range, then I make this dialog box active. I'm going to do something similar here. So I'm going to copy this and go back to my treasure chest, and I'm going to paste it in there. And I called it dialog window. Let's call it dialog box, which I don't need to, no, I do need to do, because that's not part of the interactable. Okay, cool. And then here, I can get rid of this really fast. I can actually get rid of everything inside the if statement, because I'm going to be changing this. So I want to check to see if we're pressing the key code space and the player's in range, and then also not is open. So if the chest isn't already open, I don't want to be opening the chest if the chest is already open, if that makes sense. So let's see here. Actually, kind of going back on myself here, let's do this slightly differently. Things always go badly when I don't follow my exact notes, when I think I know better now than I did a day ago when I wrote my notes. But let's do this instead. So if the player presses the space key and they're in range of the chest, then I want to check to see if not is open. Then I'm going to do one specific thing. So I'm going to say open the chest, and else I'm going to say maybe not close the chest, but chest is already open. Okay, so for opening the chest, I'm going to make a quick little method here. So I'm going to make a public void open chest, and then I'm going to make another little method here, public void chest already open. That's a bad name. I'm sure there's a more concise way to write that, so feel free to come up with a better way to write that than I have. Okay, so opening the chest means calling open chest, and if the chest is already open, that means calling chest already open. That's just such a stupid name for a method. Good lord. Okay, so if we're opening up the chest, what that means is, I'm going to comment this out here so we can go step by step. Dialog window on, dialog text equal to our contents text, because that's why we have this item as an object here, so that we can get all of the stuff from the contents. Then I also want to, I need a reference to the player's inventory as well. So I'm going to say public inventory player inventory. So I want to add this item, add contents to the inventory. And then what else do I want to do? I want to raise the signal to the player to animate correctly. And then I want to set the chest to opened. And then the last thing I want to do is to raise the context clue so that it turns off. And I'm going to do some modifications to that, to the onTrigger enter and onTrigger exit for this. So I'm going to override the base class, but that's okay. Now, if the chest is already open, let's comment this out. We're going to turn the dialog off. We're going to set the current item to empty or null. And then we also want to raise the signal to the player to stop animating. And we're going to do this with one signal this time. We're going to do it correctly from the beginning. All right, cool. So let's go piece by piece here. So first we're going to take our dialog box.setActive true, and then we're going to say dialog text.text is equal to not context, contents dot item description. Okay. And then add contents to the inventory. So that's two pieces here. So we're going to do a custom method here in just a second. But as far as the other part goes, is we're going to say player inventory dot current item is equal to contents, so that the player's inventory can find what was just accessed through the chest. We're going to raise the signal to animate. So we're going to say raise item dot raise. We're going to set the chest to be opened. So is open is true. And then we're going to raise the context clue. So context dot raise. And that's to get rid of that little question mark bubble, because otherwise the question mark bubble is going to show up over our item. Now, what I want to do here is go into my inventory script. And again, scriptable objects can hold methods on top of just data. So I'm going to make a little method here to add something to the inventory. So this is going to be a public because I need to access it from the treasure chest. We're going to call this void add item. And we'll pass in an argument here of item to add. Okay. Now, first we're going to check to see, is the item a key? And if it is a key, so if item to add dot is key, I need to restart Visual Studio, it keeps freaking out on me. Dot is key, then what we're going to do is say our number of keys plus plus. Else, if it's like, you know, a bow or something that you might want to show up on an inventory screen, then I'm going to say if item, or if not, items dot contains item to add. So if it's not already in our list of items, then we're going to items dot add item to add. Then we're going to add it. I started commenting and then I stopped commenting. Good Lord. Okay, so back here to the treasure chest. So to add the contents to the inventory, I'm going to do player inventory dot add item, and the item I want to add is the contents. All right, cool. Chest already open. We're going to turn the dialog off. So dialog box dot set active false. Set the current item to empty. So player inventory dot current item equals null, and then raise the signal to stop animating. We'll do raise item dot raise. Okay, cool. So that's almost all that we need to do in the treasure chest. There's a tiny bit more, but the rest of what we need to do in here is pretty simple. Okay, so now what we need to do is have the player understand what they're supposed to do when they get that signal. So what I'm going to do is open up my player movement script here, and I'm going to add a few quick checks. So let me go to my scripts, player scripts, and then I'm going to intentionally do something incorrectly just so I can make sure that I'm at least explaining part of what's going on here. So player movement is what I want to open. Now, way back when, I already added this interact enumerator to our states. And the reason I did that is because I wanted a way to have the player not move if they're in that dialog window. So like you press space and then the dialog window goes away and then you could move again. That's why I put this in here. So first thing I'm going to do, in my update method, I'm going to check to see, is the player in an interaction? And you can use this for like cutscenes and stuff too. So I'm going to say if current state is equal to player state dot interact, then I'm going to just return out of the update method. I'm not going to look for any inputs at all. Then the attack coroutine turns the player back to walk. I'm only going to turn the player back to walk if we're not in the interact. So if current state is not equal to player state dot interact, then I'll go back to walk. Because otherwise the player could hit the space bar if it's like a multi-page thing, and then for some reason it might think you're doing the attack and then put you in the walk state so you can walk around when you're in this weird animation. I know, because I did that. All right, cool. So I think that's good. Now, what I want to do next is let's create a quick little method here. So this is going to be a public void, because I need to be able to assign it in the signal listener, so it needs to be public. We'll call this raise item. And then what this is going to do is say animator.set bool, and the bool I want to set is, what did I call it? raise item. So I want to set that to be true, but let me make sure I know what the name of the pool is. Receive item. So I'm going to set receive item to be true. And I'm also going to do what? 1 second. I'm going to set the state to player state dot interact, and then I'm also going to set the sprite. So that means that the player needs to know what their own inventory is, which would make sense. So I'm going to make a reference to that. So public inventory, player inventory. And then back down where I was, player state is interact. Oh, that also means it needs to know what the sprite is. So I'm going to say public sprite renderer. I'm going to call this received item sprite, because you might not be getting these only from my treasure chest. You might be getting them from like I don't know, vendors or quest givers or stuff like that. So then in here, I'm going to say received item sprite dot sprite is equal to player inventory dot current item dot item sprite. All right, so there's already some issues with this, but let's go back to Unity so that we're not doing like a million lines of code. And let's fix this. So first thing I want to do, the signal listener is here for the context clues. Okay, I'm going to window shade these and this, and then I got my player movement. So it needs to know what the player inventory is. So in my scriptable objects, in my player stuff, oh, I didn't even make an inventory yet. Okay, so let me do that. I'm going to create inventory inside the player stuff, and I'm going to call this player inventory. All right, so my player is going to know what the player inventory is, and the received item sprite, that's going to be the received item object that I made a child of the player. And okay, cool. So this isn't going to work, but I want to show you why it's not going to work so that everybody can be on the same page here. There's like 3 different ways it's not going to work. Let's find out. So I don't know why I put my treasure chest so far away. Silly me. All right, so oh, I didn't assign the dialog box and stuff. I didn't do any of the treasure chest stuff. All right, so let's do that. So it needs to know what the dialog box is. I already created one for the sign, so I can just tell it that it's that item, the dialog box I'm using for the sign. I can give it that text. For my raise item signal, that can be the receive item signal. For my player inventory, that's the player inventory, and then this particular chest is going to have a small key. All right, let's try it now. All right, so going over to the chest here. Okay, so a couple weird things are going to happen here. So first, my context clue turns on and off like it's supposed to, so that's good. But what happens if I hit the space bar? So small key, is there a door nearby? And then now my context clue is on always. And yeah, just all kinds of stuff is going on. So let's find out why this is. So first, the player's state switched over to walk somehow, despite the fact that the player state was supposed to be in interact. Now, the reason it did that is I didn't actually hook up my signal listener. So on my signal listener here, I'm going to add, and then this needs to know what it's pulling from. It's going to pull from the player. needs to know what script. It's going to pull from player movement, and then from player movement, it's going to call raise item. So that's one issue. So now let's try this again. All right. So going over here, down. Okay. So what happened here? First of all, the key is on the wrong layer. So I need to change its sorting layer from default to breakable. And there it is. Let's see how much that sticks out. It's not consistent with the world that it's in. And that's because I made it. And I'm nowhere near as good as Arndis as the person who made this. But anyway, so there's that. Now, if I hit any of the keys, player can't walk because the player is in the interact position, which is good. But if I hit space, dialog box went away, but player is still in the interact. And the reason that is because in my treasure chest script, when I'm pushing space, I'm doing chest already open, which sets the dialog box inactive, sets the current item to be null, and then it raises this flag again. But this flag in the player movement script only does this one thing. It only sets the player state. So what I want to do is I want to check to see if current state is not equal to player state.interact. Then I'll do all of this. But if it is player state.interact, I'll do something else. So else, the other thing I'll do is animator.setBool receive item false, and I'll set current state to player state.idle. Nope, not interact. And then I'll set the received item sprite.sprite to be null. All right, cool. So that'll fix one of the issues. There's still like two more. All right, so if I hit play here, and I forgot to change the received, I changed it when I was in play mode, the received item sprites thingy thing, sorting layer. So I'm going to change it now, but I'll have to remember to change it again when I exit play mode. So if I go over here and then down, okay, so small key, is there a door nearby? I can't move. If I hit space, I'm back to moving. And now that's happening. So also, the chest doesn't look like it's open. And see how it keeps like raising the flag? So let's fix those. So let's go to the treasure chest. So I only want to I only want to raise the item if let's move this is open. So I'm going to cut this from here, and let's put the is open down here so that I'm setting it to be open there. And then I'm only going to do all of this if not is open. That should fix one of the issues. Okay. All right, now the other thing I need to do is as far as that context clue goes. So I'm going to have to override the base interactable. So if I go to the base interactable, I'm going to grab these two methods here, copy them, and go back to the treasure chest, and I'm going to paste them in here. So I'm only going to do this context clue stuff if not is open. So I'm only going to do the context clue stuff if it's not already open. So and not is open. All right, and I don't have to make these override voids because I'm using something from mono behavior. but we'll be using some override methods next time. All right, cool. So let me save this. Let's go back into Unity. Let's try this again here. Told you this was going to be a long video, so apologies. All right, so hitting play. We're going to go over here, and we're going to go down here, and then we're going to go over the chest. So context clue is working fine right now. You can see that. And if I go in here, press space, I forgot to change this stupid sorting layer. I can't move. If I hit space again. All right, cool. So, what happened? All right. What did I do wrong? Okay, give me a second and I'll be right back. Okay, so here's the problem. I have a logic error here. So in my treasure chest update method, I'm checking to see if it's not open. If it's not open, then we open the chest. If it is open, then we're going to go to chest already open. But since I moved setting the chest to be open out of this block of code, that means it never gets seen as open. So what I'm going to do is move that back to where it was, and I'm going to use another way to do this. So I'm just going to cut that line from there. I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to remove this check because that check will never be true because it only goes to this method if it is open. And I'll tab that back over. Now, to protect against what happened, that weirdness with us holding up nothing, I'll go to the player movement script, and so if current state is state.player, I'm not going to do any of this if there's not a current item. So if player inventory dot current item is not equal to null. Yeah, my battery's low. I need to wrap this up, and this video ended up being so much longer than I meant it to be. So apologies on how long this video is. Alright, cool. So now if I go to play in Unity, before I do that, let me change the sorting layer here to be on the breakable layer. Let's hit play, and let's test this out now. As soon as it's done thinking, that is. Okay. Maybe. Awesome. Okay, so that was a pretty silly mistake. I had to run and grab my charger. So what we need to do is in the treasure chest script, we're going to not set the player inventory current item null. So I'm just going to get rid of these two lines here. And then also save that. In player movement, in raise item, we're going to make sure that we're checking to see if player inventory.current item is not equal to null, and then So if it's not equal to null, meaning there is a current item, we're going to check to see what the state is. If the current state is interact, then we're going to do the receive item animation. We're going to set our current state to interact, and we're going to set the received item sprite. If we're not in interact, then we're going to go out of the receive item animation. We're going to set the current state to idle and the received item sprite to empty, and then also the current item to empty, which means that we won't be entering in here if we keep raising that flag. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to hop back into Unity here. Let's hit play. Now, one thing you'll notice, if you go over to your scriptable objects and then into your player inventory, every time that we've added a new key, it's been added here. So like right now we're sitting at 13 keys. I'm just going to put that back to 0. We can reset that back to what it's supposed to be every time we play. But eventually we're going to make a little save system that's going to reset that back the way it's supposed to be. So here we go. Context clue turns on and off. I got the small keys or a door nearby, and then if I hit space again, it goes away. And now if I hit space in here, like I don't even get a context clue anymore. This didn't change the way it's supposed to though, and let's fix that super fast. I know this video is way longer than I meant it to be. In the treasure chest script, I thought I had already set this up, but apparently I didn't. Oh, no. I set up the animator part. What I want to do now is I'm just going to, in Unity, with my treasure chest selected, maybe, there we go. The animator, I've got my different states here. So I've got entry into idle, and then I'm going to make a transition from idle to open, and then a transition to open idle. I'm going to add a parameter, which is a Boolean. I'm going to call this opened. I'm going to highlight this transition. This shouldn't have an exit time, shouldn't have a fixed duration, and it shouldn't have a transition duration. And then I'm going to give it opened is true. It's just going to go there. And that means it's automatically going to go to open and then to open idle. And then I'm going to check in here when I open the chest. I'm going to do anim.setBool opened to true so that I'm setting that Boolean value. All right, last one, hopefully. So I'm going to hit play here. This is gonna work this time, I promise. All right, so we're gonna go over to our treasure chest here. We're gonna go over, down, there we go. Then I'm gonna go over here. Got my little context clue that turns on and off like it's supposed to. I'm gonna hit space, treasure chest opened, space again, treasure chest is now empty. All right. That video is so much longer than I wanted it to be, but thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for a little announcement video. Have yourselves a wonderful day.